Dear Fano, this week's video I want to focus on slopes and direction of tree lines because it keeps on coming up in our question and answer sessions. And I know there's a bit of confusion out there because in some Syntropy texts people advise you to grow your tree rows in a north-south orientation, and I would totally agree with that on a fairly even surface, but when you work with slopes you might want to consider using contour lines as a orientation. Even so, you will run into a bit of shade problems, but we have to consider access and we have to consider erosion. At least in the first few years we want things on contour growing to stop any downward movement of litter and soil. So I'm standing here a bit in an angle myself. We have a slope here of 45 degrees. It's the steepest part, and we are still growing a Syntropy system on here. Here down in the extreme we have mostly focused on trees that are nitrogen fixing, mulch producers like these flame trees. It's in the Erythrina genus, and we just pruned up the limbs. We just left one whip standing to make flowers for the tuis for the winter. They will eventually lose their leaves as well towards the end of winter and let all the sun in. But because we didn't want to wait for all of that, we gave them a prune now and put all this nitrogen-rich mulch upwards into the next terraces where we have bananas. So the bananas, they got a knee-deep mulch of these prunings. In that way we move nutrients back up the hill. And the flame trees themselves, they hold the logs in place that we obtain from our eucalypts and the flame trees themselves. And these logs create barriers where we can walk on this steep slope, and it holds our mulch in place so it doesn't slip downhill and creates better infiltration for water and slows down erosion of soil and litter loss. So back to the orientation. So say sun comes for us on the southern hemisphere, comes from the north, and our slope something like that. Now if we would plant our rows north-south, so they would have to go this way, then we would have very dense tree rows going up and down the hill, and that would not give us much opportunity to put logs across and anchor them, and we will have a lot of water runoff going down the hill unhindered. Now if, as in permaculture, we want to create either access like pathways, terraces across the slope, or even swales to have water infiltrating, yeah. Say if we do want to do swales, or we want to make terraces, or just little pathways, obviously they have to run perpendicular to our north-south tree rows that we would be advised to do in certain Syntropy texts. And on a steep slope like that, to me personally, doesn't make that much sense. So on a slope we ignore that. Of course we do observe it when we have a choice on a flat piece of land, but on a slope where we might want to include terraces, swales and pathways and all these sort of things, they will be obviously on contour, otherwise they would just funnel water down the hill. And ideally we synchronize our tree rows parallel to those infrastructures. So, but first of all, let's look at what happens on a hill when it comes to water household. So say we have a forested hill, we have a root network underneath, and the very root network is connected with mycorrhiza. And mycorrhiza can transport nutrients from the soil minerals into the plant in exchange for sugar, but also mycorrhizal network is very efficient at transporting water from deeper layers in the soil up into the plant. And because all the mycorrhizal network connects all trees with each other, in theory, this tree here, by feeding sugar into the fungal network right up here, can actually draw water from a water body down in the valley, and all the humidity that we find up in the toe slope, yeah, this water theoretically can travel within the mycorrhizal network all the way up to the top of the hill. There's no reason why that should not be possible. So that would explain why some eucalypts up on top of a hill can thrive in a very dry environment. There are other factors as well, of course. They can harvest dew, and also mycorrhiza is very good at attracting the humidity from nighttime skies into the soil much better than the roots themselves can do. But also there should be a pathway of water coming uphill being transported by the mycorrhiza much more so than by the capillary action within the soil pores physically. So there is probably something like that happening. And there is then additionally to that a capillary action within the soil, bringing soil water that was stored during winter down in the bedrocks, in cracks and deep soil layers. Capillary action will bring that water up to the surface, influenced to some degree by moon phases, of course, and also just water traveling up in capillaries again from the moist valley bottoms up to the hill via capillary action. So we have all of those water pathways. Now, when we develop the hill, we often in permaculture start by making access, making terraces, all sort of things. So say we have a slope like that, and in permaculture we come in very quick, bringing in machinery and making terraces and swales. Maybe another terrace here. And then as we dig this soil out here and here and here, we then have to deposit that material nearby. Oh, like that. And this bulges out like that. Yeah, and suddenly we create steeper areas as we create these terraces. So even so we gain some nice flat space where we can make a pathway or even a driveway, yeah, vehicle access possibly, yeah, because now we get into the firm soil below and it's flat. We can bring machinery in and so on. But in exchange for that, we have created areas that are now steeper than they were before on the original slope. That makes them prone to erosion. And what we have also done here now is, where before we had capillary action, mycorrhizal water draw up the hill, we have interrupted that now. And that way, we actually will dry out that place, at least in the first couple of years, far more than it used to before. We expose all these cuts now to the open sun, to the wind, and not having the capillary action or the mycorrhizal water transport helping us with water here, it's all gone. We find that suddenly the site can dry out tremendously, and now we suddenly find we need irrigation. Yeah. So think well before you do terraces. They have certain advantages. Yeah, the accessibility, workability, the mulch stays nicely in place here. We have created some loose soil here. It's good to get trees established. There's certain advantages, no doubt, but in the first few years we will have issues with water transport in there because we have disrupted a system that had it all in place. So now, of course, we need to plant very fast. We need to have all the plants already available before we even start doing something like that, in order to repair the damage that we did and create a new fungal network to remedy that. So now the choices of vegetation. Here we have nice areas of fill, uncompacted soil. We get a double load of topsoil here. Yeah, we have the original layer of topsoil here and plus the topsoil from here going there. So we have a double whammy of topsoil on these humps here. So that's where our new abundant system can go in. All right? The new abundant system can go right in here. But at the same time, as we do in Syntropy, we mix it up with some helper trees that belong to the accumulation system, just to help fueling that along. Because if we just focus on abundant plants here, like avocados, bananas, and so on, we will exhaust that fertility, that energy that's stored up from the double topsoil. We will exhaust that. And we want these other plants that help renewing that as we go along still, producing energy for us to maintain the fat of the land, as to speak. And now back to the question of sun exposure. In Syntropy, as in any form of agriculture, we want maximum of sunlight to get to our plants, because that translates to more crops. It translates to better soil because it feeds the microbes with sugar, and therefore we create humus and all these sort of things. Now, when we go in this direction, we have all these plants, of course, creating a bit of a shade behind them. And more so in winter, when the sun is coming from a shallower angle. So how do we compensate for that? Yeah. So one possibility would be, as we did here with our flame trees, we could say, okay, our emergent trees, say, let's call that these guys here a medium layer, and above that, like in between medium layer trees, we put emergent layer trees, so they come up, but they can be winter deciduous, right? In the tropics, we often find plants that are dry season deciduous, but here in this case what is helpful for us is a winter deciduous, because that coincides with us for a lower sun angle. So say in winter we have these 3 rows with a emergent deciduous, medium layer evergreen. So the medium layer, for instance, in our situation here is cherry moya, and the emergent one is flame tree. And then we could then in Syntropy combine that with layers of evergreen high canopy, rows, yeah, and in the very same row, so these rows could be, say, 2 meters apart, 3 meters apart, depending on how you want to lay out. So we have high strata trees combined with low strata evergreen. Sorry. So we have 1 tree row with emergent deciduous and a medium evergreen, and then we have a 3 row with high evergreen and low evergreen together. That way we actually fit them nicely together to get the best coverage, but we still get a lot of diffuse sunlight coming into the system. So that way we loosen up the wall-like appearance of a tree row and let more light coming through. And you see, plants are not like solar panels. They can handle diffuse sunlight quite efficiently. And especially here in New Zealand, we have a lot of white clouds that reflect sunlight from all sort of angles. We have leaves blowing in the wind, so there's always sunlight coming through the canopies. And then the other thing that we mustn't underestimate at all is in summer we have too much sun, right? So most plants during a summer day will shut down their photosynthesis completely. They're not shutting down half or so. Once a certain temperature is reached, especially when it is combined with scarcity of water, as in our case, then the stomata, these breathing openings on the underside of the leaves, they just shut down. They contract, they shut down in order to conserve water. And that means a lot of plants don't do anything at all between 11 o'clock in the morning and 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So the time when we have the maximum amount of sunlight energy coming in, the plants are actually taking nothing. However, in summer, our emergent trees, like our flame trees, and the high layer Inga beans, for instance, in our case, they will provide this shade, or this semi-open shade canopy, and underneath the cherimoyas, citrus, and whatever shorter evergreen plants, they then actually don't shut down. They continue to photosynthesize in that semi-shade without shutting down. So effectively, they actually produce more sugar in their tissues than if they had all the sun, because they have a bit of shade and coolness therefore. So when we get too fixed on how much sun our food forest gets, we have to keep in mind that in summer the limiting factor can actually be shade. And that has been proven, for instance, with grasses. Yeah, cocksfoot as an understory produces actually more forage with a bit of a shade, because some plants just can handle all of that heat or the sun. Yeah. So here in this case we have tropical and subtropical upper canopies that create a semi-shade for us in summer, and in winter it's all open and we get all the sun that we need here. So for us, having tree lines going along the contour make a lot of sense. We can use these tree lines then to hold logs in place that we gain from all our eucalypts and flame trees and Inga beans. We get these logs, we can hold them against these trees that are standing about 1 meter apart, perfect for laying out these logs, creating natural terraces. Even if we don't make any terraces, by putting logs there and creating simple pathways, over time we create stronger and stronger terraces organically without the use of machinery, without big impact on the capillary action of the soil and the fungal network that we found when we started. Yeah. So think well about, do you need to make terraces and swales, or should you rather organically do something on the slope as it is? And sometimes you can also do a bit of both, a terrace here and there, and in between you do it organically as a compromise, right? So I hope that helps to clarify why we follow contour lines in our system. And then don't forget to bring the grasses in. Yeah. So we are talking about now 2 tree rows, 1 tree row emergent and medium, and the next one to it high and low, and then again emergent and medium, and then high and low. That way we get this mixed up nicely, but still within the same row we have the same management. And then in between, especially on the steep parts, we want our grasses. We might want to leave 1 meter or so between grass rows so we can move around easily when we manage them. And in these grass rows, we have to be clear how we manage them. If we manage them just with a sickle, then we can put some shrubs, trees into those grass rows and then eventually phase out of grass and have these shrubs and trees in place. But if we want to use machinery such as what we do here, for instance, for our vetiver grass and for our cocksfoot, we use battery-powered hedge trimmers. That makes the work so quick and easy and enjoyable. And then you would not want trees and shrubs in the same row. Then you want to keep just 2 grasses, yeah? But remember, our grasses are here in erosion control, and in the first years they stimulate mycorrhizal growth in the soil. They bring a lot of sugar into the soil. They produce heaps of mulch. In all of those ways, they're actually better than trees, and they are quick. They, like elephant grass, within half a year you have your 2-meter shelter behind which you can establish your 3 rows. Yeah, so it gives you sun protection, wind protection. It gives you all the mulch in the world. It opens up the soil. It puts sugar in the ground. It forms topsoil very fast. So definitely don't start out, especially on a slope, don't start up without using grass rows. They're just invaluable. And you can use the grass as a fodder, as a mulch, whatever, but please do put in grasses. In our slope here, frost-free, sun-exposed, you might want to choose elephant grass, sugarcane, vetiver grass worked really well here. In cooler climates and on flats, you might want to opt for cocksfoot, which can handle a lot more shade in the future and stay in the system for longer. But by all means, use something of grasses. In cooler climate, also miscanthus is a good choice. It will die down in winter, but that's all right. And you can also use other plants to give you similar function as grasses, such as rows of pineapples. You might want to experiment with flax, but try to have some plant in there that gives you these strong fibrous root networks that make a nice erosion control along the slope, especially when you make terraces on a steeper slope and you create these extra steep in-between areas between your terraces of loose soil. You want to catch that, you want to anchor that soil, and you want to cover it as fast as possible. Yeah, so you don't have the sun drying out all these cut faces. So, I hope that clarified a few things. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and yeah, that's how we do it.